Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well and happy Easter, by the way. That's when I'm filming this, which is crazy. Insane. But guys, I am thrilled. I am overjoyed. I am so excited because I just watched Sinners. Oh boy, let's talk about it. So Sinners is directed by Ryan Coogler, one of my favorite directors working today. Guys, I need you guys to lock in. I need to lock in for this review, okay? I have notes, okay? I have things that I want to say because we need to dissect this film and we need to do it justice because Ryan Coogler did the work. Mr. Coogler did the work, so I need to lock in and do the work too. So Ryan Coogler has emerged as one of the most exciting, interesting directors of our time, giving us incredible works like Fruitvale Station, the first and second Black Panther movies, and Creed. Ryan Coogler has emerged as one of the directors that I am most excited about. He is my Christopher Nolan. Okay, all you girlies, all you fanboys out there who are super excited about Christopher Nolan, yeah, this is how I feel about Ryan Coogler. Although funnily enough, Christopher Nolan's name did pop up at the end of the credits for this movie with a special thanks. I wonder what that's about. Maybe Ryan was like calling him up to get some tips on how to use those IMAX cameras, those dastardly IMAX cameras, okay? But listen, this isn't a Christopher Nolan review. This is a Ryan Coogler review. This is a review that will be dissecting and delving into Sinners, his most recent project, one that I was so excited for, and one that I will say right up front did not disappoint. I really want to get into the nitty-gritty of this film. I'm almost nervous to film this review because I really want to do this film justice, like I said. Before we dive into all of the good stuff, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. Now, the story of Sinners is centered on identical twins, Smoke and Stack, who are both brilliantly portrayed by Michael B. Jordan. The setting here is 1932, where these two twins and World War I veterans return to the Mississippi Delta after years of living in Chicago. They use the money that they stole from Italian and Irish gangsters in Chicago to purchase a sawmill from a racist landowner called Hogwood, because they have a vision to turn this sawmill into a juke joint for the local Black community. They bring along their young cousin Sammy, who is the son of a preacher and an aspiring guitarist and musician, to be one of the opening acts for their incredible juke joint, despite the fact that his pastor father is staunchly against it. And on this fateful day, these three set off on an adventure to open up this juke joint, this new hub for the community, and have the time of their lives. But unfortunately, this grand opening turns into a horror story for the ages when we have the entrance of three evil vampires who are lured in by Sammy's incredible music, which it turns out is able to summon both happiness and joy and evil and destruction. This fateful night sets the scene for one of the most gruesome, horrifying, but also beautiful, magical, and supernatural nights ever depicted on the big screen, and it is a joy and delight and wonder to witness from start to finish. With this incredibly intelligent, insightful, and thought-provoking premise, Mr. Coogler has set up an incredible horror story that is enriched with so much culture, so much history, and so much social commentary that it leaves you pondering. It leaves you thinking for hours and even days after you see it. So that is the story, that is the setup, as well as my overall thoughts on Sinners. I wanted to keep that part short and sweet so we can take our time delving into each of the characters and the deeper meanings behind these stories and these character arcs. Starting us off with the twins, like I said, Michael B. Jordan is playing a double act here, not even the second, not even the third, not even the fourth actor to do this year, but certainly the best double act that I have seen so far in 2025. He was immaculate in this role. When it comes to Smoke and Stack, they are brilliant characters. I mean, this isn't the first time that we have seen twins who have almost opposite personalities depicted on screen. But with Smoke and Stack, even though there's definitely differences in their personalities, with I want to say Smoke, is Smoke the one in red? This is gonna get confusing, okay, but let's call them red and blue. I think Smoke is the one in red and Stack is the one in blue, but Smoke appears to be more of the leader. He is incredibly hardened. He's also very entrepreneurial and commercially minded. He's the one that is reluctant to give members of the communities any discounts or accept any of the coupons that they use in lieu of actual dollars, actual dollar bills, because of the different ways of payment that they have in their community. But he doesn't want to allow that for the juke joint initially, and he has to be convinced to do so. So he is definitely the leader of the two and has a very strict kind of vision and way of doing things to get things done. But that's not to say that Stack doesn't have anything to offer either. They clearly make a really good team. He and Stack end up separating as they prepare for the opening of their juke joint, and so you see Stack spend a lot of time with Sammy. He's trying to build up his confidence. Sammy knows that he wants to be a performer and a musician, but this is a completely different environment for him to do so than what he's used to over in his father's church. So you have that kind of bonding moment between the cousins, especially when Sammy is performing. Stack is able to recognize his talents and his gifts almost immediately. He's also the one that spins the story about the guitar being from some famous musician, but in the end it's revealed that it was actually their father's guitar, which there's so many layers to that on its own. I think it was wonderful to see the differences in the twins' personalities, but there's also a lot that unites them, like the fact that they are both World War I veterans, and they clearly went through hell, as did all of the veterans in that war. But the fact that they came back to their hometown all those years later with their bodies and their minds both intact, as Annie mentioned, just showed, I mean, first of all, their resilience and grit and their survival instincts, and likely because they were protecting each other in that war, but also because, you know, they were being prayed for and they were being protected through old traditional means, as Annie mentioned as well. So the brothers have so much history just on that front. Before we even get into whatever the hell was going on in Chicago, whatever the hell, we need a prequel. We need a prequel, because did my ears detect the word Calpone? Did my ears detect the word stealing from the Irish and the Italians? Like, there's a whole story there that we did not see anything of. So there's definitely much to be explored on that front. But these two guys are not even that old, okay? They're young blokes, but they've already been through hell and back. And that journey has gotten them all the way back to their hometown, where they want to open up this juke joint. An entrepreneurial venture for sure, but also a way of perhaps reconnecting with their community and experiencing the freedom that they are owed, that they are due after fighting for their country, and also getting up to mischief in Chicago with other gangsters. So when it comes to the broader context of these two characters, I think it's incredible to see that Ryan Coogler specifically chose to spotlight World War I veterans who were black. You know, oftentimes when we see footage of World War I and when we hear stories about about it, we seldom get any mention of soldiers of color who are also fighting in the war as well as World War II. And so Ryan Coogler has made that intentional decision to include the fact that these two twins were World War I veterans, to again give them that representation that they are due. And this is something that he does in all of his works. Like, it's definitely something that's really important to him, to have that Black representation and that stamp of Black history and culture throughout his filmography. But here he's tackling it from a different angle of these World War I veterans. It's not something that's at the center of all of the story, but it's definitely something that informs the way that these characters act, particularly Smoke, who is a soldier through and through, and he mentions it throughout the film. And so it enriches these characters. It gives them, like I said, a really interesting history, one which we seldom see represented elsewhere. And it also helps explain how they're able to move, right? Like how they're able to move throughout the horror action sequences that we see in the film later down the line. Now, closely tied to this idea of these World War I veterans returning home, there's also a lot of significance in their home being Mississippi, because they initially were in Chicago, chilling there for 7 years, but they're not actually from Chicago, they're Southerners. And so the fact that they've returned home to Mississippi is extremely significant when you consider that they've dived right into the middle of the Jim Crow era. So this is touching on the history of Black soldiers returning from the wars in Europe to come back to a country that isn't even thankful, that isn't even grateful for their efforts abroad. They weren't treated like the heroes that they were. They instead returned to homes where they were ostracized, where they were oppressed, where they were lynched, where they were discriminated against and called slurs and boy and all sorts of demeaning things, despite the fact that they were tapped on the shoulder to represent their country, to fight for their country and to bleed for their country. None of their sacrifices were acknowledged, let alone rewarded, when they returned home. And we've seen recent projects, particularly projects that were spearheaded by Black filmmakers like Lovecraft Country, we'll talk about that in a second, spotlight this phenomenon in history. And this is another example of that, and it helps to explain why the twins then turned to, first of all, living in Chicago in the North, where things were slightly better or just different in terms of racism, and two, the fact that they pursued a life of crime, right? Because they weren't able to make an honest way down in the South. They would have been just destitute. There was nothing left for them, particularly because they couldn't rely on their family because their father was evil. And so they had no choice but to make a new life of themselves in Chicago and turn to a life of crime. And when they were able to accumulate some wealth and some capital, they ended up returning home to build something that could be of benefit to their wider community. And that's just such a beautiful sentiment that is soaked in tragedy when you consider that they had no choice but to take that route in order to make something for themselves and their community. Now, the two twins return home to not only their community and a brand new Duke joint, but also to the loves of their lives. Starting us off with Annie, who is portrayed by the legend, the icon, the Queen, Wunmi Mosaku, who is absolutely phenomenal. Truly phenomenal in this film. Annie is such a special character because she is a traditionalist. She is a staple in Black culture and Black history. Annie practices hoodoo, and she represents someone who has rejected westernization. She wants to stay true to her roots. She lives by the bayou. She's quite isolationist in that way, but people still come to her for natural remedies and all of the kind of traditional practices that were brought over from Africa over the centuries of the slave trade. This character is so special and so fascinating to me because, like I said, she represents traditional, African spiritualism and the preservation of that and the rejection of, like I said, westernization and in particular Christianity. And the fact that this film was released on Easter weekend, the drama, the tea, Listen, it was probably just Warner Brothers trying to rake in as much money during spring break, but I'd like to think that there's also a tie-in thematically here, because through the character of Annie, you see someone who practices spirituality, but not in the traditional Christian sense. And this is the kind of spirituality that was condemned. It was wiped away from our cultures in Africa. It was deemed demonic and evil and devilish. As the European colonizers came over and started to spread the word of Christianity and eradicate all of the traditional spirituality that we had in our cultures already, they demonized the cultures and practices that we had so that they could replace it with Christianity, which was a way to better control the masses. They were able to control people and instill fear into people using Christianity because it was a tool that they were familiar with, and they didn't know our ways, didn't understand the traditional spirituality that existed in our respective tribes. And so here you have the character of Annie, who embodies all of this and represents all of that rich history. And it's so refreshing to see that she's not demonized in this film. She's not depicted as some crazy old lady who's practicing voodoo magic. She has ingredients in her shop and she knows which ones are beneficial for different things. You see the little kids coming over asking for her help, and it's very practical and pragmatic. And not only that, but she also mentions how she was praying for the twins while they were at war, showing how she was using her knowledge of hoodoo to try and protect the people that she loved and cared for. And not to mention, throughout the film, we see how the knowledge that she has is extremely beneficial for the team when they're going up against the demonic vampires. Now, aside from the wider ideas and cultural context that the character of Annie represents, she's also a really brilliant character in her own right, because she's shown as really cool, calm and collected. Like I said, super knowledgeable, and she is the mind and heart of the team who's able to help the gang through the more like spiritual, supernatural elements of this horror story. And then there's that added element of the deep romantic relationship that she has with Smoke, which is just so moving. I mean, when you see him approach her little hideout in the forest, you see that there's actually a little grave for their young child who ended up dying when they were just a baby, and he says, you know, daddy's home, and it's just really heartbreaking. And that's kind of tied into the end where you see poor Annie and their daughter reappear, and she just looks so ethereal. She looks like an angel, and it's just the perfect portrayal of her and her daughter, and Smoke ends up returning to them both in this like beautiful poetic ending. And so that element of her story, the relationship that she has with Smoke, is just so beautifully written as well. She was just written as such a brilliant character, and this is yet another reason why I'm such a huge fan of Ryan Coogler and why Christopher Nolan could never. Why? Because Ryan Coogler gives us incredible female characters. Oh, let's talk about it. Ryan Coogler does what Christopher Nolan has quite frankly never been able to do, and that is give us incredible black female characters. Oh, let's tell the truth, okay? Let's tell the truth and shame the devil here. And I love that about him, because you can tell that he pays the same close attention to the female characters, even if they are love interests, that he does to the male characters in his film. But then next up we have Mary, who's portrayed by Haley Steinfeld, and she was Stack's previous lover before he went off to Chicago for 7 years and had no intention of coming back, and she's pissed. Okay, Mary is such a vibe. Love Mary. Huge fan of Mary, and huge fan of the way that Haley Steinfeld portrayed this character. I'll admit I did have some reservations about her casting, purely because I felt at times that she came across as a little too young. A little too young. There were times when she was talking to Sammy and she sounded like an old head or an older head, but in reality they looked so close in age that some of those lines just they weren't quite as convincing as they could have been. But that was more of a casting decision than it was to do with Haley Steinfeld's performance. She absolutely delivered when it came to her performance, and some of those lines were so funny. My cinema was laughing their heads off where she told him to get the F out of her her face, okay? That was hilarious. And so I really came to love the character of Mary. And here we have a character who represents the group of people who were kind of in between. You know, they weren't quite black, they weren't quite white, but because of that classic one drop rule, technically speaking, Mary would be deemed black because one of her grandparents was literally mixed race. Like, again, by British standards, that girl is white. Like, she is white as hell. And even by their standards, to the eye, she would be considered a white woman because she is passing. But when you get into ancestry.com and you see that family tree, as soon as they clock those black ancestors, she would be considered a black woman. And that dogma and that principle is just so stupid to me, but it was just another form of oppression and another way of ensuring that black people and their descendants never achieved equality. Now, through the character of Mary, you see the dynamics that people who passed as white kind of had to navigate during that time, because whilst they had to hide a big part of themselves, i.e. their ancestry, from the white community in order to be able to settle in and benefit from the advantages of whiteness, they didn't have to hide any part of themselves when they joined the black community. They were able to revel in that sense of family and community amongst black folks, and they were welcomed into these black spaces in the way that they wouldn't be if the white people knew about their black ancestry. Hence why we see Annie call Mary family when the vampires come along and ask why she's allowed in the club and not them. Annie's like, she's invited to the cookout because she's kin. You might not see it, okay, but if you look a bit closely, okay, she's one of us. And beyond just the character of Mary, Ryan Coogler makes a point to spotlight the different ethnic communities that existed in Mississippi during this time. You have the Asian characters, you also have the Native Americans, the ones that tried to warn that white woman. Okay, the ones that tried to warn the members of the KKK. They were like, a vampire has been around here, you really shouldn't let them in. And they were like, oh, we're not going to listen to these Native Americans. Well, I love the fact that they told them once, but they didn't insist. The Native Americans didn't insist. They weren't like, no, please believe us, there's a vampire coming along and he's gonna cause you harm. They were like, listen, we've been trying to find someone. Have you seen him around here? He's a bit dodgy looking. You really shouldn't let him into your house. You really shouldn't let him into your house. And the white folks were like, no, we didn't see anything. Get out of here. Like, get off our property or whatever. And the Native Americans were like, all right. We warned you. I ain't gonna say it twice. We warned you. But it was so wonderful to see these different communities spotlighted in this film. We don't often get that kind of representation when we take a look at this era and this part of the world. And people like to act like, oh, all of a sudden, you know, we have all of this diversity and it came out of nowhere. Well, if you have accurate representations of history, then you would realize that it's not out of nowhere. America has quite literally always been a melting pot. Now, unfortunately, the Juke Joint's big opening night doesn't turn as much of a profit as the twins had hoped. I mean, they're catering to a financially struggling community. You know, people don't have hard cash, they have coupons and things that they can trade. And this is the time of the sharecroppers, which was just slavery rebranded. And so people just don't have it like that. But they do want to go out, they do want to have a good time. And so Stack convinced him to still take those coupons and still allow the community to come together in this very special place. But still, if they want to keep this place open, they do need the dollar bills. So Mary decides to go out to the vampires and see if they have some spare change ringing around in their pockets. But alas, her little conversation with these three strangers becomes the beginning of the end for this opening night. Next up, we have Sammy, and Sammy is a very special guy indeed. I mean, first of all, huge round of applause. Huge round of applause for Miles Catton, who absolutely destroyed, who absolutely devoured in his debut performance. He was incredible. His acting was on point, but also his singing. His singing. Apparently he used to tour with her. Yeah, that makes sense. He's talented. That absolutely makes sense. His singing and his instrument playing was just divine. He was so brilliant in this film, and he is such a key character because he is the anchor for one of the main themes of the film, which is this celebration of blues music. Wow, this film is an ode to blues music and it is extraordinary. Honestly, the soundtrack for this film is just as special and just as divine as the story, as the performances, as everything else. And of course, to no one's surprise, we see Ludwig Göransson. We see Ludwig Göransson at the scene of the crime. Oh, and the reason why I'm smiling, okay, the reason why I'm sitting here all smug and confident is because I told you so. I told you so. If you have been watching my channel for a while, first of all, thank you. Second of all, you will know, you will remember that years ago, literally 5 years ago, 5 years ago, I told y'all that this was the man to beat. I told y'all that Ludwig Göransson was emerging as the new Hans Zimmer or John Williams of his generation. He is a spectacular, brilliant composer who has done it all at this point. Listen, let's wake it up. He's done it all. He is, of course, a frequent collaborator with Ryan Coogler. They went to school together and apparently they were like flatmates or something. So they go way back, okay? And that led to us having the incredible soundtracks for Fruitvale Station and for both Black Panther movies, one of which he won an Oscar for, please. And then he broadened out to a different corner of the Disney empire, giving us the theme for The Mandalorian, one of the greatest TV themes of all time, actually. And then he started to dabble in some Nolan. Maybe that's why there's actually no, because he was friends with Ryan Coogler before. Anyway, he started to dabble in some Nolan. And listen, as many issues and problems that I had with Oppenheimer and Tenet, okay, the soundtrack was never one of them. The soundtrack was never, ever one of them. And of course, his soundtrack for Oppenheimer got him his second Oscar. So when I say I told you so, I mean I told you so. I told you so in 2019. I told you that this was the man to watch, and he has proven me right time and time again. Because of course he has given us excellence. Of course he has given us brilliance with this here soundtrack. This soundtrack, like I said, is a love letter to the blues. But it doesn't just tap into the blues. We're also dealing with some hip hop here, which isn't surprising. He is very well known in that space. He worked on Donald Glover's albums, so like he knows what he's doing in every single genre, guys. But then here's the thing, he also taps into some rock and roll, which, oh, what are the origins of that again? Please remind me. And then he also goes back into Africa, back into his roots, okay, from his Black Panther work, and gives us some kind of traditional African beats here and there. I think they're largely like Nigerian. That's kind of the space that they work in. Ultimately, in this soundtrack, you have this incredible mishmash of all of these different genres that originated from and were heavily influenced by Africa. And Ludwig Göransson was able to convey that through his soundtrack while still keeping it focused to a specific genre overall, and that is the blues. Honestly, third Oscar incoming. All I have to say is third Oscar incoming. But anyways, going back to the character of Sammy, he is the conduit through which we have the theme of music, of rhythm and blues, and the celebration of Black music from past, present, and future be conveyed. And what an incredible conduit to have, because Miles is so gifted and talented that you believe that he could be this almost supernatural creature in his own right, who is able to awaken the ancestors and bring forward spirits from even the future to enjoy his music. That storyline crescendos to one of the most incredible scenes, especially music focused scenes, put to screen. That musical sequence, I believe it's a oneer as well. On top of everything else, I believe it's a oneer. But that musical sequence where Sammy is playing his music and the aura, the sheer aura that he has, is calling in the ancestors from before, everyone around him in the present, as well as, oh guys, as well as the musicians, okay, the dancers, Black folks celebrating in the future. Guys, let's be be so serious. This is the best film of 2025. Oh, this is the one to beat. This is the best film of 2025. Now, this film is made up of such an incredible group of characters. I wish I had time to go through them all, but of course, other highlights include Delroy Lindo's Delta Slim and Lee Jun Lee's Grace Chow, as well as Jamie Lawson's Pearline and Omar Benson Miller's Cornbread. Like, they're all brilliant characters. But the last character that I really wanted to spotlight was the villain. The bad guy, okay? Because we need to talk about Jack O'Connell's Remmick. He is the lead vampire, the only vampire at the beginning of the film until he infects two others. And he was just incredible, guys. I had to hold my hands up and say this white man did the thing as well. Like, he was absolutely incredible in this film. And speaking of a white man giving a great performance in a Ryan Coogler movie, it's kind of giving Andy Serkis, no? It's kind of giving Andy Serkis in the first Black Panther movie. Like, I see the correlation there. But Jack O'Connell was just note perfect as this evil vampire who was just so seductive. That was one of the key characteristics of this version of the vampires, is their seductive nature, and particularly the way that they used music in order to draw people in, which again ties into this use of music on a wider scale to bring happiness and joy, a celebration, a community coming together over music, forgetting all of their woes and troubles and connecting, but also summoning evil spirits. And also some of those evil spirits being able to use music to meet their own ends as well. Through the character of Remmick, you have different kinds of music be spotlighted, and that is Irish folk. That is what he's able to use to lure people in. And it's just so brilliant how, you know, despite the fact that I'm not as familiar with the Irish folk music, okay, I like a jig here and there, but still, because of the way that it was composed and because of the way that it was performed, it was just as seductive as the rhythm and blues that we saw from the Mississippi folk. So they really did a great job of balancing the two, because each of them were just as alluring as the other. Now, the fact that Remmick is Irish and super old, like super old Irish, it draws in a comparison and connection between Irish history and Black history in America, both of which have themes of colonialism and oppression. So it's really interesting to see Ryan Coogler spotlight that side of history as well, especially as it pertains to a white population, but he distinguishes between a white populace that is the oppressor versus a white populace who has undergone oppression themselves. You hear Remmick talk about how in the old country their land was taken from them by the English. Listen, the English always at the scene of the crime, and in a particularly haunting moment you even hear him say the Our Father, just as Sammy was saying it himself. He chimes in, showing that he knows the same old tools of oppression that were imposed upon him and the Irish folks back in the day that Sammy and his father know as well. And there was something so creepy and so unsettling about that, seeing the demons themselves who Sammy was trying to call upon God to protect him from, using those same words and chiming in like a chorus. Instead of them being threatened or scared or going up in flames, they know those words because once upon a time Ireland was also colonized and Christianity was also spread across their land, and they became super Catholic, and it substituted all of the folklore and all of the spiritual traditions that they had on their land as well. And so using these words doesn't have any effect on this old Irish vampire. He knows those words very well. He used to use them himself. Now, Remmick specifically wanted to get his hands on Sammy because of that gift of music that he has and the ability to summon old spirits. And he was hoping that he'd be able to connect to his old kin, you know, the kin that he left behind centuries ago. That's why he wanted Sammy to be a part of his coven. And even though we didn't get a lot of depth and a lot of explanation for the character of Remmick, he was super charismatic and very seductive in his musicality, but we didn't get any exposition or a lot of backstory to him. But I found that what we did get was was sufficient. It was more than sufficient to create a very interesting antagonistic character. And as someone who is a fan of the vampire lore, as someone who grew up watching the Twilights, the Vampire Diaries, and the Superior originals, as well as enjoying the much more recent Interview with the Vampire, I was so excited to see Ryan Coogler delve into vampire lore and give us a vampire horror story. Like, this is just, it feels like this is just two worlds colliding for me. Like, this is two worlds colliding to create the perfect film for me specifically, and I could not be happier. I thought all of that was brilliantly done, and the horror and gore that came with it cemented it in the horror genre. I'm a scaredy cat, as many of you guys will know. I don't really do ooky, spooky, scary stuff, but I like to turn up when it's a black filmmaker. I like to turn up when it's Jordan Peele or apparently Ryan Coogler. And in the case of Sinners, it's not too ooky spooky, but it does have that gore and body horror that firmly cements it in the genre. Now, speaking of Jordan Peele, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that it's highly unlikely that this film would even exist if it wasn't for Jordan Peele. What Jordan Peele did with his films, particularly Get Out, the one that started it all, literally needs to be studied. It literally needs to be written in the history books, because it was truly a turning point for cinema, particularly in the horror space. I would say that Jordan Peele's Get Out did for horror what Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse did for animation. These were turning points in film and in Hollywood that really shook things up in a way that we hadn't seen in a very, very long time, and we continue to enjoy the legacy of this now with Sinners. But we also saw similar tendrils, like for instance Them, and my beloved but much maligned now Lovecraft Country, which I think Sinners also takes quite a bit from. And much like with these other black horror projects, Sinners uses horror as a framework to explore a whole array of rich black cultural history, as well as social commentary to do with the black experience, particularly in America. Like I mentioned earlier, this whole film is set in 1932, smack bang in the middle of the Jim Crow era, and this is also set in the Mississippi Delta. So the stench of racism is surrounding each and every one of these black characters, and there are Klan members as far as the eye can see. Even the man that sells the twins the property to turn into a juke joint is a Klan member himself, despite the fact that he denies it initially, saying the Klan no longer exists anymore. Whilst the twins wanted to turn that old sawmill into a monument of freedom and black expression and music and community, these Klan members had other ideas, because come sunlight, they wanted to turn it into a graveyard. So here we actually have the story of two monsters, the vampires that came in the middle of the night and the racists that came to kill in the break of dawn. And so with all of that being said, I'm going to be giving Sinners a 9 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Sinners, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this movie down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.